would like to start by first congratulating the Africa Research Institute for publishing Counterpoints and also the earlier publications on Somaliland. I think this certainly adds to the body of literature which is important both for scholars as well as for policymakers. But I think today's discussion comes at a convenient moment for me as I'm busy now preparing the second edition of the book you just mentioned, and this has been a bumper week in the UK for a number of Horn of Africa passionate scholars and policymakers. At Oxford on Monday, Tuesday, there was a seminar on Eritrea. Yesterday at Chatham House, the discussion on the Ogaden, and today the Africa Research Institute seminar on Somaliland. And importantly, we end this week with 1 year of the passing of Nelson Mandela and a number of events planned tomorrow to commemorate the passing of Nelson Mandela. But I'd just like to flag a few issues to stimulate discussion. One, I firstly want to congratulate Michael on publishing Counterpoints based on his book, which really does, as he pointed out, essentially outline the efficacy of a homegrown hybrid formula for nation building. In many parts of the African continent, I think that has become more the norm, that it has to be home-driven. Yes, in a globalized world, you would also get the diaspora, outside elements like exile communities participating, but the essential thrust of a homegrown initiative is what makes things work. I think of the anecdote of Kissinger when he offered Mandela to come in and help in the South African political transition. And Mandela thanked him for his efforts, but realized that it has to be essentially home-driven. So I think in many parts of the continent, that has become more the norm than the exception. The second point, which as my introductory point, and I'll just flag 6 very quick points, is the point Michael makes that, and I think Edward, you've also made this point of history and context. Even my presence now as South Africa's ambassador in Eritrea, I've got to see how the Italian colonialism in Eritrea was so different from southern Somalia, and how you have a level of cohesion very different to what's happening in southern Somalia. And that aspect in understanding countries is so critical. Indeed, as you correctly pointed out, when trying to understand why is there in Somaliland what we would euphemistically call political bungee jumping. Bungee jumping in the sense you wait to get right to the edge and hit down and get back up again. You see this in Sudan as well. In Khartoum, in the talks between Sudan and South Sudan, political bungee jumping seems to be part of a norm in the Horn of Africa. And to understand why is that so that people want to go right up to the edge and come back. So those 2 critical points, as I think as the thrust of your book and the publication, certainly needs to be taken into account by policymakers. Let me just flag a few very brief issues and flag them more for discussion rather than elaborating on them. Michael has outlined the recognition, passion as a cohering, disciplining force within Somaliland. And the question we have to ask, why has that project not advanced? My quick take on that is a number of openings have been made for Somaliland within the African Union Commission. The challenge, I think, is to ask Somalilanders why have they not been able to run with those numerous openings, including a number of international law documents which make the case that they have a very good case in international law. I know Rwanda, South Africa, many countries made their opening. Those documents are available, both which were published by the African Union Commission as well as the South African International Law Advisors. Why is there a gap in taking that project forward? Why is it that in the case of Sudan, South Sudan, it moved faster And I think Michael has hinted at some of the issues in that regard. Perhaps we could take this up a bit later. The second brief point I want to raise, and which I think we have to take into account in political transitions, it's become a big issue in Africa, is the question of military veterans. In Zimbabwe, we've seen the case. Even in South Africa, President Zuma, when he came to power, decided that the Ministry of Defense will be called now the Ministry of Defense and Veteran Affairs. Because if you don't take care of military veterans, you're up for a number of problems in terms of crisis, in terms of, I think many of you who have followed Zimbabwe have seen that in other parts of the continent. The third point Michael has already raised, this question of the diaspora and the insider. We already see that unfolding in Mogadishu, where insiders feel that the outsiders have come and just tried to rule. South Africa had a similar challenge where Mandela had to balance between the exile group, the Robben Island group, and then the internal opposition group, the UDF group. So the balancing act of how those groups will be managed in the political transitions in future is something we have to keep in account. The fourth and quick issue here, Michael has highlighted this already, the question of trade links and the movement of religious ideas. The interpretations of Islam you have at the moment in Somali areas today is very different to the ones you had in the 50s and 60s, where you had an indigenous, Sufi-based, home-based expressions of religion. But it's interesting, the late President Iqbal managed to balance this between the Arabian Peninsula interpretations of religion and Somali interpretations of religion. That has an impact also on the role of women, which is highlighted in his book. The fifth point is clearly one of the points which come out very clearly, both in Somaliland and in South Africa, is this issue of the majority-minority clans or how they are perceived. How a leader like Iqbal takes on a minority or perceived minority leader like Rayali, and how during his time he then takes on a majority perceived clan leader, an Isa clan leader as his deputy. How that would be managed in future is just as important in any African context. Finally, but not least in importance, is the role of political parties in the shaping of the state. When we're at Oxford now and discussing the Eritrean state and the Rwandan state, my point is, if you want to look at the future of the state, and in Africa, this is my view, the real debates take place in the ruling parties and the political parties. And it's the political parties, whether it's the governing ANC or the ZANU-PF or the Chama in Tanzania, or for that matter, UDUP or Kolmia, that's where the real debates take place. And how are we watching the debates there closely and the impact it will have on a future state? Once again, thank you for this opportunity to share a few viewpoints, and I look forward to a stimulating discussion.